cried so much. Not even at the USA in 1994 with the drug test did I cry so much. I see both events as terrible injustices. They're different, but they're both injustices. On that day, the saddest of my career, I swore I would get my revenge. It was the biggest disappointment of my life. It marked me forever. It defined me. Because the thing about running on rages is that sometimes you can't switch it off. At that point, when I was left out of the final squad of 22, I realised that Bronca, or anger, was a fuel for me. It really got me revved up. I played best when I was after revenge. And this is the way he describes that moment, and it's absolutely brutal.
Diego Maradona is to be sent home in disgrace.
And then I started sobbing like a child. I insist. Today, they cut my legs off.
Once again involving
It was the hand of Diego. At the time, I called it the hand of God. Bollocks was it the hand of God. It was the hand of Diego, and it felt a little bit like pickpocketing the English. So all the Bronca built Maradona. At the same time, it was killing him. Because the thing about running on rages is that sometimes you can't switch it off. I am the same as I always. I am me, Maradona. I am El Diego. I think I could have played in the 1978 World Cup. I was up for it. I was readier than I'd ever been. When I found out I hadn't been selected, I cried a lot. I cried so much. Not even at the USA in 1994 with the drug test did I cry so much. I see both events as terrible injustices. They're different, but they're both injustices. On that day, the saddest of my career, I swore I would get my revenge. It was the biggest disappointment of my life. It marked me forever. It defined me. I felt it in my legs and in my heart and in my mind that I would show them all. At that point, when I was left out of the final squad of 22, I realised that Bronca, or anger, was a fuel for me. It really got me revved up. I played best when I was after revenge. That is a quote from El Diego Maradona, the autobiography. His one and only autobiography, actually. It was first written in Spanish and then translated into English. And Diego's tone and style of language is definitely maintained throughout the book, and the biographer done a great job in that. And so that is quote from Diego when he's just 17 years old. He's talking about the day his life changed, and by that point he's been playing first team football for 2 years, and he was clearly the best young player in Argentina. Everyone knew about him, and the manager El Flaco left him out of the World Cup squad, and he was pissed, and he said this, and it's even more important because this was actually in Argentina itself, and this is what he had to say about it. I realised that Bronca, or anger, was a fuel for me. So just to repeat that line, I realised that Bronca, or anger, was a fuel for me. And one thing's clear to me, from reading the book and watching his highlights, Maradona had a lot of talent. He was a magician on the pitch. It was very obvious to anyone who watched him and everyone who played with him. And Gary Lineker actually gave a really beautiful tribute to him after he died. One of the things he spoke about was a time when he and Maradona played together for the rest of the world team. And this is what Maradona did, which mesmerised everyone. He did something that was just incredible. One of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen on a football pitch. He juggled the ball all the way out to the centre circle, and then he got to the centre circle, still juggling it, and then he went bang, and he whacked it as high as he possibly could. He waited, it came down, and he did it again. He did it 13 times, and the most he ever did was walk 3 paces to it. All of us were sitting there going, oh my God, that's impossible. I remember going to training the next day in Barcelona, and we all tried it, and the best anyone did was 3, and they were running for the third one. I've just never seen anyone have such a beautiful affection with a football. That's just one description of the beauty Maradona put on display in front of one person, in front of millions of people around the world. But what I want to speak about today is what drove him. And it wasn't just talent, it was something that he was gifted with and something that he developed. And from what I read, what drove him was the rage of being doubted. Bronca. That gave him fuel and fire, and once you see that, you can understand his whole career. There's just a lot of rebellious moments throughout his life, whether it was at Napoli, Argentina, Barcelona. There's a number of these moments. So we're going to kick off when he was in Fiorito in the 1960s when he was just a kid. So Maradona grew up in a poor home. This is how he describes the house he grew up in, writing about it years later after the World Cup, after everything. I have happy memories of my childhood. Although if I had to define Fiorito with just one word, it would be struggle. In Fiorito, if it was possible to eat, people ate. And if it wasn't, they didn't. I remember the winters were very cold and the summers very hot. Our house had 3 rooms. It was made of solid materials, a real luxury. You went through the wire gate at the entrance and there was a patio of earth. Then the house, there was a dining room where we cooked, ate, did our homework, everything. And then 2 bedrooms. On the right with my parents, on the left measuring no more than 2 meters squared was ours, all 8 of us kids. When it rained, we walked around dodging the leaks. You got wetter inside than out. Forget about a stink, we didn't even have running water. That's how I started weight training. We could use empty 20-litre cans of oil to fetch water from the only tap in the street so my mum could wash, cook, everything. So 8 kids in a room, cramped conditions with no running water, and the way he started training his legs was carrying 20-litre cans of water just so his family could wash and cook and clean. So just think about that for a second. He was training his legs in a very unorthodox manner before anyone coached him. And the obsession he had with the ball, that was already there too. Before anyone knew his name, he spoke about it like this. We would always be there in the Potrero waste ground, running after the ball. Saturdays and Sundays were spent like that all day long. Weekdays too, but only from 5 o'clock because during the day I had to go to school. Everything I did, every step I took was because of the ball. If the torta sent me on an errand, I would take with me anything that resembled a ball. It could be an orange or scrumpled up paper or cloth, and I would go up the steps onto the bridge that crossed the railway, hopping on one foot, the right one, and taking whatever it was on the left. Tack, tack, tack. That's how I walked to school as well. So this guy walked to school hopping on one foot with an orange in his hands, doing keepy uppies the whole way every day for years, and you can imagine how much muscle memory that would be ingrained into his brain. So by the time when he played his first organised football match, you can imagine he'd done thousands of hours of one-touch ball control just walking around his neighbourhood. And there's always these little moments in an athlete's history where they're training for something, even if no one's officially coaching them. For example, one guy who comes to mind is the boxer Manny Pacquiao. He's a great example. He'd run up mountains as a kid in the Philippines carrying sacks of rice so that he could take it to the market. And that was before anyone knew his name. He was a nobody back then. And if you look at his calves during his career, they're thick and strong. And you could tell that's been developed over days and days, months and months of training hard without even knowing that he was training. And it's the same thing with Maradona. Carrying those water cans, doing the keepy uppies. He was training for football long before he knew he'd be a footballer. And he speaks a little bit about the struggle for food as well. This is something I want you to remember when we get to the World Cup. He says this: Don Diego is the kindest person I've ever met in my life. The truth is that thanks to him, I never lacked a meal. That's why I had strong legs. Even though I was thin, perhaps in other houses the kids didn't eat every day, so they got tired before me. That's what made me different from the others. I had good legs and I ate. So his dad, Don Diego, worked himself half to death so that 8 kids could eat every day. 8 kids. And Maradona credits that as the reason he could outlast people on the pitch. So that's the backstory. He's born into nothing. He's built his body carrying water, and he's built into this game doing keepy up. He's getting to school. And here's the thing, he never forgot any of it. Listen to how he talks about his dad later in the book. It was hard work feeding all those mouths, and my old man nearly killed himself doing so. That's why I tried not to fuck it up too much. But it was hard. Sometimes after Dad picked up his paycheck, he'd buy me a pair of trainers, which I would ruin immediately because I played football all day long. It would make you weep, and in fact, I would weep, because not only would my trainers be wrecked, but on top of that, the old man would thrash me. But I don't hold it against him. They were different times and different customs. My dad didn't have the time to talk to me, so he had to smack me. My old man had to catch up on at least a little sleep so he could get over to the factory at 4 a.m. If he didn't, the whole house would fall apart and he wouldn't have enough to eat. It wasn't unusual. Many families were and still forced to live this way. In fact, it was a very valuable experience for me. My skin got thicker because of what I lived through in Fiorito and elsewhere, but my feelings never changed. Let me repeat that. My skin got thicker because of what I lived through in Fiorito and elsewhere, but my feelings never changed. And that's the line I want you to keep in mind. He never let go of it. His dad working 4 a.m. shifts and trainers being ruined, the thrashings that he got, he carried all of it through the rest of his life. And honestly, this is a bit that hits close to me because, I mean, I didn't grow up the same way as Maradona did, nowhere near. But the generations before me did, in a way. My parents were fortunate enough to grow up in England, but my grandparents grew up in Pakistan, and my uncles and aunties and a lot of people from their generation grew up in Pakistan and then moved over to England. And I'll tell you about the struggle that they had to face. They they were living with multiple families in one house. My dad says that even fizzy drinks were considered a luxury, and you couldn't take much for granted. So, I mean, it wasn't at the level of Fiorito and what Diego went through, but it was the same strain of struggle. And when I read passages like this, I think about how I was built on the work that the generation did to get out of those conditions, and how much good fortune I have. And Maradona never had that fortune. He had to be the one who broke out, and he had to do it through football because there was nothing else for him to do. So even as a kid, Maradona is performing in front of crowds. He's 9 years old, 10 years old, and he's already putting on a show at halftime of professional matches doing skills. And here's what happened at a Boca match in 1970. But the best time was during an Argentinos Boca match in 1970 at the Vélez Stadium. I started with my skills, tack, 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 and the crowd started clapping along, and the first team players returned. The ref came back, but the crowd started shouting, "Let him stay, let him stay." It was the whole crowd shouting, not only the Argentinos fans, but the Boca fans too, even louder. So he's only 9 years old, and both sets of fans are shouting at the referee to let him stay on the pitch. And the kid's more entertaining than the game that's going on. And it reminds me of Kobe Bryant in his book. Actually, his dad was an NBA player, and when Joe Bryant played at home, Kobe would be on the court at halftime, he's sweeping the floor, and he'd get to practice a little bit with the basketball, and the fans loved it. It was similar dynamic. The fact that the kid was more entertaining than the actual professionals. And so when Diego's 15, the press start to look for him, and he says one headline that sums it all up. I remember one headline in particular because it summed up everything that was happening to me at the time. At the age most kids hear stories, he hears ovations, it said. In only 3 years, I had gone from Fiorito to the magazines, the TV, the media. It was all too fast. I used to get nervous in interviews. I didn't buy my own hype. I didn't feel like I was anybody special. I had to grow up too fast. I got to know other people's envies. I didn't understand it. I locked myself in a room and I wept. I had to grow up quickly. So let me just repeat that. At the age most kids hear stories, he hears ovations. That was a headline. And he's locked himself in his bedroom. He's crying because he doesn't know how to deal with it. He's got this crippling anxiety that a lot of athletes go through in life. A lot of athletes, there's all this pressure and expectations. And one obvious example coming to mind is Tiger Woods. He done the exact same thing in his teens. The pressure on him, mostly from his dad, Earl, was unreal. Earl was used to make these grandioso claims that Tiger could change the world. He'd be bigger than Muhammad Ali, than Gandhi. And so imagine being a 15-year-old kid and being told by your own dad that you're going to be bigger than a world historical figure than Muhammad Ali. And so Tiger spoke about this often with his girlfriend. He'd cry on the phone to her and he'd say that the pressure was so much, it was crushing, and it was all because of the expectations that his dad put on him. So it's a similar kind of overwhelm that Maradona is facing. It's, a different sport, but they're the same age and they're feeling the same pressure. So already at 15, you should have a good sense of the dynamic with Maradona. He had amazing talent on the pitch. He was overwhelmed by all of the tension and he can't deal with it. I mean, who could at that age? These great athletes, they don't succumb to it. They have two options. They either push through it or they fail. That's it. And then 2 years later, the manager of the Argentina national team leaves Maradona out of the World Cup squad. So it's 1978 at this point, and this is the foundational moment of Maradona's career, and this is where the whole Bronca thing gets named by him in his own words. He's 17 at this point. He's been a first team player for nearly 2 years, and he's the best young player in the world, possibly the world. And the manager of Argentina, El Flaco, he's picked the final squad, and Maradona's left out, and this is how he felt. I cried a lot. I cried so much. So I want to take you back to 1978, one of the foundational moments of Maradona's career, when he's left out of the World Cup squad. El Flaco leaves him out, and he's crying in his bedroom. He's distraught. But that bronca that I was speaking about comes to play here. That anger that Maradona uses to fuel him. So he gets left out of the squad, and then this is what happens. 2 days after El Flaco broke the awful news to me, I put on the Argentina trip. 2 days after El Flaco broke the awful news to me, I put on the Argentinos trip and went onto the pitch. We beat Chacarita 5-0. I scored 2 goals and made 2 assists. So 2 days after the worst news of his life, he's back on the pitch and he scored 2 goals and gets 2 assists. And that's the bronca I was talking about. He's cut from the team and he uses that as rage and he immediately converts it into football. So he's never sat with a disappointment for a week. He uses it as fuel for his matches and he does that throughout his career. And this tells you how his career works. That team in Japan and was by a long way the best team I have ever been a part of in my career. I've never had so much fun on the pitch. At the time, it was the greatest joy of my life. We played such beautiful football. I had decided to take revenge for the 1978 World Cup. So that's the 1979 Youth World Cup, a year and a bit after being cut from the senior squad. And Maradona's captain of the Argentina youth team now in Japan, and they win it. And he just says it straight up. I had decided to take revenge for the 1978 World Cup. That rage that he helped fuel his performances and win his first international title. And when I was reading this, it reminded me of Sugar Ray Leonard, who ran in the same kind of fuel that Maradona did. When Sugar Ray was deciding to turn pro, he was sitting in the Yankee Stadium one night and he was watching a fight, and this is what happened. I still was not ready to make a decision, yet sitting in Yankee Stadium that night, I found myself mesmerised by the whole spectacle. The pressure, the applause, the electricity, all of it. I pictured myself in the ring, performing, winning, the welterweight version of Ali. Bailing out my parents was the initial motivation to turn pro, but I'd be lying if I said it was the only one. And then there's another moment in Sugar Ray's career that captures the Bronca idea word for word. When the world was writing him off before the Hagler fight in 1987, he calls his agent up and listen to what he says. These motherfuckers think I'm going to lose. I'll show them. I'm not going to let Hagler touch me. That's it. That's the Bronca that fuels these athletes, their performances, to make them the best that they can be. And so the thinking is, the world doubts me, that's the fuel, and I'm going to show them. And so in both instances, Sugar Ray went on to beat Hagler and Maradona went on to win the Youth World Cup. So think about that. That's two different sports, different countries, but it's the same idea. That fuel shows up in their performance. I had a much smaller version of this in my life. A couple of years ago, I was on a family golf trip. We do this every year, 5 rounds of golf over a few days. And going into it, I was playing really badly. You know, I was upset, I was angry, and there was a lot of doubt, not just from me, but from other people as well. And then for about a month before the trip, I practiced pretty much every day, and it paid off. I won the championship. It was best golf I've ever played in my life. Honestly, I haven't matched it since because I haven't trained that hard since. But it's basically, and then when I was thinking that, it reminded me of Michael Jordan, how he would make things up in his head just so it would fuel his performance. So he'd make it personal and then he'd use it as fuel to work. And I kind of did that on a smaller scale just to drive me to go to the range and practice as much as I could. And Maradona did it as well, just on a scale that I will never ever touch. So I want to move on to the next year when Maradona's 19 years old. By this point, he's already scored 100 goals. And here's a beautiful example of how his Bronca handles public criticism. There's a keeper, a Boca keeper, Hugo Gatti, and it's the day before the match, and he tells the press, Maradona's alright, but he's overhyped and he's a fatty. And then this is what Maradona says. I was furious because I had at last got my chance to play in a deciding match and he came out with that. I answered Gatti with everything I had. I said to the press that it was a question of jealousy. Caterpillar had already noticed that the angrier I was, the better I played. He started winding me up. Okay, today you scored 2 goals against him, and that's the end of the matter. No, Jorge, not 2. I'm going to put 4 past him. Before the match, Hugo came up to me and said that he hadn't said what had been reported, but that he thought I was a phenomenon. But by then, I didn't care. I just wanted to keep my promise to Jorge. In the end, I vaccinated him 4 times. So, listen to the structure of that. So, Gatti slights him. He pisses Diego off. And then the manager, Caterpillar, he sees the rage and then he basically pours petrol all over it. He wants to make Diego even angrier. And so he says to Diego, put 2 past him. And Diego's like, no, I'm going to do 4. And then the fact that Gatti tries to take it back is too late. And Maradona is involved in... And then Maradona scores 4 goals. And the manager's in on it. He knows that an angry Diego is a better Diego and he doesn't bother calming him down. He wants to wind him up. And the same thing happened with Imran Khan, almost word for word. He was 18, he was on tour in Scotland and he overhears 2 teammates who are badmouthing him. The turning point came at Selkirk, Scotland. Asif Iqbal and Aftab Gul sat talking about me, aware that I could hear them. Their verdict was that I would be lucky to get into the second 11 of the English club side, let alone a county team. They made no attempt to hide their scorn of my abilities. Their remarks were made to hurt me. I was so angry and humiliated that I vowed to prove them wrong. I would go back to the drawing board and sort out my bowling action. I'd make myself indispensable to the side as an all-rounder, even if it meant working myself into the ground. So again, different sport, same fuel, same engine. Imran was humiliated. He vowed to rebuild his action and to become indispensable so that no one could ever talk crap about him again. And the landing line was, I was so angry and humiliated that I vowed to prove them wrong. The exact same thing happened to Kobe as well. Throughout his career, he was famous for it. He would basically keep a mental list, and every higher draft pick he would keep a note of. Every coach who left him off an all-star team, he carried all of it, and the moment that captures it is the first time he doubted himself. So he's scared of going pro at 17, and his dad sits him down and says this: when is the first time you ever doubted yourself? You never doubted yourself with high school. All those people who said you can't do this and you can't do that, you proved them wrong. Why start now? The only advice I can give you is, why start now? And then, so I'm going to repeat that line again. All those people who said you can't, you proved them wrong. So that's the Bronca again. His whole career ran on it. He was working and fighting to prove his haters wrong, his doubters wrong. And there's another moment when he's 15 years old. He's at Sonny Vaccaro's camp. He's leading Adidas camp, and this is where all the top high school players in America go. And this is what Kobe said: I wasn't the best player at your camp this week, but next year I will be. Imagine that. Imagine having that level of humility and poise to say that, you know, I didn't do as good as I could, and next year I will be. That confidence as well. It's almost arrogant. And so for context, Sonny Vaccaro was the guy who signed Michael Jordan to Nike. He made it all happen. So when Kobe walks up to him at 15 and says this is not some random scout, this is the man with the keys to American basketball. And then years later, Vaccaro pushed the Adidas deal for Kobe. It was the same guy, same role. And then Kobe came back the next year and he did exactly what he said to do. He was the best player in the whole camp. So the key thing to remember is nothing gets forgotten with these guys. The best remember everything that anyone says, and they use it to their advantage. So I want to speak to you now about Maradona's most famous, controversial game of his life. It was the quarterfinal in England in 1986. So this is 4 years after the Falklands War, where hundreds of Argentinian kids dead. Argentina lost that war, and the reason why I mention it is because Maradona's not forgotten. He's 25, he's captain of the Argentina team, and he's spent his whole life weaponizing this idea of Bronca, this fuel, this fire, this rage that he would transform into his performances. And now he's carrying the whole Bronca. Now he's carrying the Bronca of an entire country on his shoulders. And this is what he says: the next game was against England on 22nd of June 1986, a day I will not forget as long as I live, ever. I think it is a dream goal. When I was in Fiorito, I used to dream of scoring a goal like that on the little makeshift pitch, and I did it in a World Cup for my country in a final. I say final because for us, because of everything it represented, we were playing in a final against England. More than defeating a football team, it was defending a country. Of course, before the match, we said that football had nothing to do with the Malvinas War, but we knew a lot of Argentinian kids had died there, shot down like little birds. This was revenge. It was like recovering a little bit of the Malvinas. In the pre-match interviews, we had said we'd all said that football and politics shouldn't be confused, but that was a lie. We did nothing but think about it. Bollocks, was it just another match? So he admits it, and he said, like, they all said publicly that football and politics shouldn't be confused, that it's just a football match. But he said himself that it was bollocks. It was nothing but a lie. And Maradona did nothing but think about it. He blamed the English players for the dead Argentine kids, which, whether if that's fair or not, because it wasn't the English players who did it, but that's what he was taking on into the pitch. And so I want to speak to you about, again, the most controversial, most infamous moment in football, the hand of God moment. So most people think he's been sneaky calling it hand of God, but he's not. This is what Maradona says about the hand of God moment. Sometimes I think I almost enjoyed that one more, the first one. Now I feel I am able to say what I couldn't then. At the time, I called it the hand of God. Bollocks, was it the hand of God? It was the hand of Diego, and it felt a little bit like pickpocketing the English. So he's saying very clearly it was the hand of Diego, not God. He cheated, he knew it, and he was proud of it. And this is the thing that people miss with Maradona. That match was not football; it was political, clear as day. He was wanting to get them back for the war that they had won, for all the murder that they had committed in Maradona's eyes. And he thought he was going to win by any means. He didn't care how that happened, and he was true to himself. So I want to move on to his second goal, which is considered as the goal of the century. 4 minutes later, he dribbles through 6 people. This is how he describes it. The second was, as I said, the goal you dream of as a kid in the Potrero. When we did something like that, we used to say we'd make the opponent dizzy, then that we'd made them go crazy. It was, whenever I see it again, I can't believe I imagined it. The second was, as I said, the goal you dream of as a kid. In the Potrero, when we did something like that, we used to say we'd made the opponent dizzy, that we'd made them go crazy. It was. Whenever I see it again, I can't believe I managed it. Honestly, not because I scored it, but because it seems like a goal that just isn't possible. A goal that you could dream of, but never actually score. Now it's become a legend. So I'll repeat that line. I can't believe I managed it. So Diego's looking at his own goal and he's saying it doesn't seem possible. This is something that he dreamed of as a kid, going back to his childhood. As a kid in Fiorito, poor, doing keepy-uppies with an orange, walking to school. He never thought he'd score a goal like that. And 20-something years later, in a real World Cup, he's made it happen. And, years later, who would have thought that a young Lionel Messi would have matched Maradona in a very, very similar goal? Who would have thought that? And who would have thought that all the comparisons would have been made from there on in, that Messi and Maradona, and very recently Messi won the World Cup, and they're now on this sort of more of a level playing field. I think a lot of the old school heads would say Maradona was better. He was just more magical, but I think now it's definitely more even. I would never compare the two. I think it's unfair. There's so many different variables. There's so many things to take into account. The level of competition, what the rules were like back then, how lenient they were, defending, the quality of pitches, so much that happened. Which players they had around them. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. So I would always leave them in their own lane, in their own era. So Argentina get to the final. This is Argentina West Germany, and they win. And Maradona's captain when he lifts the trophy. And the way he describes the final whistle is probably the most important paragraph in the whole book, because it's not about him. It's about how that Bronca worked across the whole team. I was watching him out of the corner of my eye because I knew it wouldn't be long. It wouldn't be long at all. I was watching RP Filho, the little Brazilian referee, and when he put his arms up and blew the final whistle, I went crazy. I started running this way and that. I wanted to hug everybody. In my body, in my heart, and in my soul, I knew I was living the most sublime moment of my career. We risked so much to achieve this. It cost us so much. Nobody believed in us. Everybody was knocking us, even our own government. We felt insulted and criticised. Even the Mexicans turned against us, cheering the German goals. Solidarity among the South Americans. Solidarity my arse. What nobody has understood ever was that our strength and our togetherness was born from just that, from our Bronca. The Bronca we felt from having had to fight against everything. That's how it had to be. This was my team, a team built from scratch and in the face of fierce opposition. So the whole 1986 squad ran on rage. Nobody believed in them. The press were knocking them. Even the Mexican fans turned against them and cheered the Germans. And Argentina's own government, they were even backing them. So every one of those slights made that team grow stronger, bond stronger, because they were a team fighting against doubters and haters, and they wanted to prove them wrong. And this is the same dynamic Imran Khan understood as well when Pakistan in 1982. It was a team that nobody thought could win. That doubt eventually became fuel, and that fuel made the team unite together and bond together, and that unity led to winning the trophy, which is exactly what happened with Argentina. It's the same pattern over and over again. The best athletes in these teams, when they have doubters, they turn that doubt into fuel, and that drives them forward. And then the best teams in the world, they use that fuel as well to unite as a team, and they fight together to win a trophy. And one more thing that's worth flagging. A lot of fans say Maradona single-handedly won the 1986 World Cup, and from reading the book, you would never see that. You would never see that ego or that arrogance. that Maradona, won it all by himself. He credits the whole team every time, and I think that's something to admire about the man. For all of his faults and all of his mistakes, it's very dignified and honourable for him to credit his team and not to take it all himself. And it's definitely a new respect that I've had for him through after reading this. So we're going to skip back 2 years briefly because Maradona's club career runs in the very same arc, on a different scale, but the same arc as it did for Argentina. So he gets to Napoli in 1984 and he's joining a team that's been fighting for relegation for 3 years. When he's joined, they do a presentation ceremony in the stadium and 80,000 people turn up to his presentation. And what he does at Napoli is exactly what he does later with Argentina. He takes the city's rage and he uses it to win the league. To have won Napoli's first Scudetto in 60 years was, for me, an incomparable victory, different from any other. Even the 1986 World Cup, we built Napoli from the bottom. It was proper workmanship. The Scudetto belonged to the whole city, and the people began to realise that there was no reason to be afraid. That it's not the one with the most money who wins, but the one who fights the most, who wants it the most. I was the captain of the ship. I was the flag. They could mess with anyone, but not with me. So Naples wasn't just a football city. They're located in the south of Italy and they're looked down upon by the rich north, and this is something that I never knew. And Maradona understood it from the day he got there, that this was bigger than football. He plays his first match away against Verona, and this is what he sees. They greeted us with a flag that made me understand suddenly that Napoli's struggle wasn't just a football matter. Welcome to Italy, it said. It was north against south, racism against poverty. Naples is obviously in Italy. So Naples is obviously in Italy, so you can see how much of an insult that would be. And the moment that sums up what Napoli became under Maradona is this. They go to Turin to play Juventus, which is the richest club in Italy at that point, and here's what happens in the stadium. On 9th November 1986, an incredible thing happened. We travelled to Turin to play Juventus. We were 1-0 down, and when we equalised, the stadium exploded. Everyone was celebrating, going mad. We couldn't understand what was going on. When Juve scored, the crowd shouted, "Goal!" Just like that. No flares, no delirium. We scored a second, and again, there were huge celebrations. Then the third, and it went even crazier. Then I realised the stadium was full of workers, Southerners, a lot of them. Then I realised the stadium was full of workers, Southerners, the lot of them. Napoli, Napoli. They were screaming, amazing. We had truly become the club of the working class, of the poor. Even in the north, we could count on the support of the Southerners, Southern workers who lived there. So that's Southerners working in the north, and they're watching a stadium that represents the rich north, but they're cheering for the team that actually represents them, which was Napoli. Maradona was. And Maradona captured that whole idea. He was a guy from the slums himself, from Fiorito. And again, that same theme that I keep banging on about is that Bronca. He took the Bronca of an entire region of the whole south and he made it into a title contending team, which is so special. So I want to jump into the second theme of the book. So all the Bronca built Maradona. At the same time, it was killing him. Because the thing about running on rage is that sometimes you can't switch it off. So by the late 1980s, Maradona's body is starting to give out. He's playing through injuries. He's taking painkillers and he's training a lot. But he then turns to the worst thing that's ever happened to him. He started using cocaine. This is how he describes the start of it, all the way back at Barcelona. My time at Barcelona was always elevated because of the hepatitis, because of the fracture, because of the city as well, because I'm more Madrid, because of my bad relationship with Núñez, and because there in Barcelona my relationship with drugs began. I have to admit that that's when I got going in the worst possible way. When you go into it, in fact, you wanted to say no and end up hearing yourself say yes, because you believe you're going to control it, you're going to be okay, and then it gets more complicated. So that's a young man who's lived most of his life in the spotlight, and he finds something that gives him, a relaxant, something that switches off his Bronca and his whole mind. And this is the honest reflection in that quote is this: you wanted to say no and end up hearing yourself say yes because you believe you're going to control it. I think that explains pretty much everyone, and I think that explains pretty much everyone who's ever had a substance problem in their life. So that's Maradona 3 years after winning the World Cup. And he's now preparing for the 1990 World Cup, and he says this: 3 months and 3 days before kickoff, I was writhing on the floor because of the problem in my lower back. The pain was so bad Though the pain-killing injection in my hip helped, I could only run like my dad. And it's a real shame at this point. He's only 29 years old and he's saying that he can only run like his dad. And then in the 1994 World Cup, this was truly tragic. When I read this in the book, it was really emotional. And you know what? It is one of those what could have been moments, because he was basically forced to take a drug test in the USA after his first match. They found ephedrine in his system because his trainer basically made a mistake of buying a different brand of supplement that they had already been using in Argentina. And then he gets banned from his last World Cup. And this is the way he describes that moment, and it's absolutely brutal. Marcos turned up with a terrible look on his face. "Diego, I need to talk to you for a minute," he said. "Look, Diego, your drug test against Nigeria has come up positive, but don't worry, the AFA directors are handling things really well. I could hardly hear the last bit. I turned around looking for Claudia. I could hardly make her out. My eyes were full of tears. My voice broke when I said to her, 'We're leaving the World Cup,' and then I started sobbing like a child. I insist. Today, they cut my legs off." That line is a killer, man. Today, they cut my legs off. Oh, it's such a shame. Because it wasn't cocaine that actually got him in trouble. It was ephedrine. It was a honest mistake. A lot of that happens in this day and age as well. There are a lot of boxers and athletes that get caught with, a chemical in their system and they get penalized for it. The sad thing is that ephedrine was already being used, and Maradona notes this in the book. Ephedrine was already being used by athletes in the NFL, in the USA, and they weren't banned for it. And it wasn't. And later down the line, it was actually considered as non-performance enhancing. So it had no effect on the body. It's something that was just found in certain supplements. So it was really sad. And I just recently read Michael Phelps' book as well, and he had a different version of this. His collapse came after he'd won everything. After Beijing, London Olympics, when there was nothing left to chase. He said publicly that he was suicidal. He wanted to kill himself. And once he'd won everything, he didn't know what to do. And with Maradona, it's the opposite. His collapse comes in the middle of his career, and his body's breaking down. He's turned into drugs, and it just shows that the thing that makes a legend is the thing that doesn't make them healthy. In this occasion, because that Bronca that he had, he didn't know how to switch it off. He didn't know how to use his energy in the right way. The good news for Phelps is that he recovered, but Maradona in a lot of ways never did. There's one thing that you can see from the book after reading all of it. After all the World Cups, after the Scudettos, the league titles he won in Napoli, he was still the same old kid from Fiorito, and he's incredibly clear about that. At Napoli, this was the offer he received to come back. And so when he was at Napoli, he received this offer to stay there, and this was the offer. "Napoli was doing everything in its power to seduce me. There was a talk of a villa on the island of Capri for me with a view of the Tyrrhenian and a private helicopter to fly me to Napoli every day, as well as a yacht, of course." So he's getting offered all these things, but what he keeps coming back to throughout the whole book, all 280-something pages, is the kid in the room with 7 siblings. He says it in different ways across the book, but the most direct version is the closing line, and we'll end on this quote. He says it in different ways across the book. The most direct version is the closing line, and we'll end on this quote. After all of it, this is what he writes. "To me, it felt like I, El Diego, had been taken out of Villa Fiorito and given a kick in the arse that landed me on top of the world, like I was in Paris, on top of the Eiffel Tower. But I was still wearing the same pair of trousers as always, my only ones, the ones I wore in winter and in summer. That corduroy pair. That's where I landed, and they demanded of me to say what I had to say, to behave like I had to behave, to do as they wanted me to do. And I did. I did what I could. I don't think I did so badly. I know I'm not the one to change the world, but I'm not going to let anybody into my world to tell me what to do, to dictate how my match is going to go, to dictate my life. Nobody will ever make me believe that my mistakes with drugs or in business have changed my feelings. Nothing. I am the same as I always. I am me, Maradona. I am El Diego." So we'll end on that quote. It's a great book, honestly. I would highly recommend. It's amazing to read this in his own words, because you really, truly get a sense of the man himself and what he went through, the ups and the downs. And at the end of the day, he was just... It's the same story with a lot of athletes, similar with Tiger Woods. And that a lot of pressure builds on these guys, and they don't have an outlet. And for Maradona in this case, his outlet was drugs, and that ultimately ruined his career. But it doesn't take anything away from what he did achieve on the pitch. He achieved a lot. He won the World Cup. He led a team, not according to him, but according to everyone else, wasn't the best team in that World Cup, and he led them to a victory. And I think that's something that every Argentinian is very proud of. And the debate has been going on over the years forever in Argentina and in the world, that who is better, Messi or Maradona. I'll be honest, I couldn't tell you who, but I can tell you I have a much greater respect and appreciation for what Maradona did, for Maradona the man and what he did, and how he was dignified and honourable, and he's very honest about the mistakes he made. But in the end, he would never stop standing up for himself. So I'll end on that note. I would highly recommend it. That's one legend down. The work continues.